So, thank you very much for joining tonight. We have a very special guest tonight. It's Danielle Zarcaro. Danielle will tell us something more about herself in a second. I'm very happy to see you tonight. Tonight's topic is very interesting for all those involved in the WordPress as their business. And I'm sure we all would like to save some time. And today, Danielle will tell us how she's saving her time for something of what she likes to do instead of working. So, Danielle, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Tell us something about yourself before we start with the session.
Sure. So I am Danielle, and I have a cat and a dog, and they tolerate each other and sometimes even get along now. So I've put them in another room. I'm in this room, so we're all good. But I live in New Jersey of the United States, and um, I enjoy puzzles, which is sort of what led me down this path that I'm on. And it's why I enjoy automation, because I enjoy figuring out how to get things to work. I run Paperback Web Development. It's a custom WordPress studio focusing on, maintaining WordPress websites. So I'm gonna actually share my screen. Let's see if we've got it here. So am I good with everybody? Let's see if I can get the chat up here too.
Yep, it looks good.
I want to see if I can get this chat guy over here. All right, well, I don't think I can. That's all right. You guys will just tell me anyway. All right, so what we're gonna sort of go over today is understanding automation. So we're gonna zap your life. This is applicable to anything, and there are some of these tools that can actually do things other than just like it's the Internet of Things era. So anything that you learn can actually be applied to pretty much any area of your life. So it's pretty exciting. So we're going to understand automation, and we're going to see how it applies a little bit to WordPress, but you're going to zap your life. It's going to be great. So the first thing I sort of wanted to ask is, how many tools do you think that you use on a monthly basis? I started it out on a daily basis, but there are things that you only go into once a month. So I want to estimate it. It's not, this is a scientific study. But so is it a few? Is it, some? You have 4 to 8. So we're talking, a lot. Or is it just so many? I fall into the so many category, but you've got Gmail, you've got your WordPress site, you've got your scheduling, just all of these tools that you use. How many do you think that you use? Let's see here. Chat. There we go. All right. So just throw that in the chat. It looks like we've got a B, a D, right? It's just so many. All right. Yeah, C. All right, so we've got some variety. We've got a couple of C's, a B, great. A. All right, so we've got a good mix. Now the good news about sort of all of these things is that you get to use automation no matter what sort of level you fall under. So I have a couple of clients that actually are just a few, and we also still get automation benefits out of it. And you'll learn that you're already sort of using some automation in your life as well. So this is sort of the questions I want you to ask yourself as we're going through this, how much time do you spend checking all of those tools? How many do you forget to check? You know, do you record your expenses and income on a regular basis? Or do you sort of forget to do it until the end of the month, and now you're in there sort of, you know, 2 hours at the end, writing down everything, trying, you know, before you go to bed, and you're like, oh my God, I totally forgot to do that. How many do you copy and paste between? So when you get a new client, how many times do you type in a client name? When you have, you know, an Excel spreadsheet, and then you have an Airtable, and then you have your billing software, and then you have your project management software. So how many times are you copying and pasting all this information between them? And then how many times do you run through the same process over and over? Maybe it's an onboarding, maybe it's, you know, sending certain emails to people. So these are the questions that I'm going to want you to sort of think about as we're going through a lot of this. So what is an automation? It sort of feels a little bit like a buzzword, you know, oh, automation and systems and processes. It sounds like a really boring buzzword, but what is it for? Because it's actually going to be really powerful for you. It's a process that you set up to make certain tasks happen automatically. So it's actually a way to make your life easier, not just your business, not just, you know, your day. You're making your life easier by using a tool or a system to perform a task or follow a process. And it makes all of these tools work together without you having to do things manually. So you're adding another tool to this list of tools. There were a couple of D's in the chat. So many tools that kind of feels a little bit counterintuitive, but by adding one tool, you sort of combine a bunch of other tools so that you actually only have one touch point. So even though it may feel like I can't add another thing to what I'm doing, there's just too many that I already have to figure out. Well, you're actually simplifying your life by adding a tool. So although it feels a little counterintuitive at first, this is one of those things that once you learn it, you're going to feel so much better about it because you really don't have to think about it. So as I said, there's going to be automations that you're actually already using. So for instance, if you ever set up a mailbox filter in Gmail to, if things come from clients, if things come from these people, Gmail actually sort of does this for you a little bit, where it sorts it into that promotions tab. So setting up a mailbox filter in Gmail is an automation. You're automating something that you used to have to click and drag, put it in folders. Now you can just do it automatically. Turning your car on remotely in the winter and having it go into winter mode is an automation. You don't have to go out to your car, turn on the heat, turn on the defroster, turn on the seat warmer, and do all these things. You literally just hit a button on your phone or, you know, on your remote, and it just goes into winter mode. So scheduling your social media posts in something like Buffer, automating your social media posting process, sending a welcome email when someone signs up for your email list. Now, this is one of those things that if anyone has an email marketing platform, that's usually going to be the easiest way to understand automation, because you're already using automation. You're setting up those funnels, you're sending a welcome email, any kind of automatic trigger. Adding a plugin to WordPress a lot of times is going to be an automation. Sometimes it adds functionality, but adding an email marketing platform plugin like ActiveCampaign, MailerLite to WordPress, so you can automatically grab your forms, stick it in WordPress, you're already automating. You no longer have to log into ActiveCampaign, copy the form, add it to WordPress, go to the right page. It's just automatically there for you. So if you could type in the chat any of other examples you can think of, this will help us sort of jog our, you know, brains, get us in the right headspace of thinking about, you know, what is an automation and what can I do to simplify my life. So, you know, type those in as they pop in your head throughout this, or maybe any connection that you make to something you're already doing, go ahead and drop it in there. So as a, you know, in a nutshell, automation platforms are going to make it possible to expand on those simple, you know, sort of stuff that you do anyway. Like I said, you're already using some automations in your business and in your life. So it just sort of makes connecting these things easier, and it lets you do more complex things without having to think about it. Because Once you do a couple, you're going to be able to do these more complex things because now you're thinking in a different way. All right. So I just want to run through really quickly what type of automation tools there are. We won't really go into too much detail. I just want to lay out sort of the world for you so that we can then drill into one of these worlds. We have the full automation platforms that are going to take this gigantic library of apps and stick them into one platform. So that's our Zapier. That's where we get our Zapier life from. Zapier calls their stuff, it's a Zap. So that's where we get our Zapier from. And then there's a bunch of other platforms that'll also do that. You have all-in-one programs that are basically going to take a bunch of things that you need to do, stick it into one program, and they're going to automate within themselves. That can also be integrated usually as well. You have these external services that will do their own automations. So you have email marketing platforms, like I said, they'll send funnels. When somebody unsubscribes, it'll send them, an "Are you sure?" When somebody purchases something, sends them a follow-up email. So email marketing platforms do it within themselves, but then they'll also integrate with other tools themselves as well without having to bring in one of those full platforms into it. So now we're talking about WordPress. We have our regular plugins like adding, your Google Analytics dashboard in with your other WordPress dashboard stuff. You're automating the process of having to create reports, having to go check another thing. So adding plugins to WordPress is going to also be, a type of automation tool. And then WordPress itself has automation plugins that's going to automate some of these things, connect WordPress with other things. So this way you don't have to go outside of WordPress to do that. And then WooCommerce is a whole nother world where you have automation tools within that. And then WooCommerce will itself then connect with your email marketing. So that's kind of a lot, but you could just sort of let it sit in your brain a little bit. You don't have to remember all these things. This is just where things happen to fall into place. So, feel free to, drop in the chat if you've ever heard of some of these. Have you ever used any of these? Do you hate them? Do you love them? Do you not have any idea what I'm talking about? And you're a little lost. Let me know. I want to gauge where you're at so I can sort of, thank you. Yeah. So this is going to take a breath. So that we've got a lot of information in our brains and, okay, so we sort of know what an automation is. We know what some of the platforms are that are going to help us do that. Here's going to be some key phrases so that you're not totally lost. An integration is sort of like an app. So when you're integrating things together, you're connecting them. That's an integration. A trigger is going to be you're waiting for something to happen. So if we're talking about WordPress, I am sitting here as Zapier, and Zapier, I'm going to sit here and wait for you to post something. So that's a trigger, waiting for something to happen. And then once that happens, then, it happened. I've been triggered to do something. And then that thing that you're doing is then the action. So, oh, okay, see, you've made a post. Now I'm going to send that post to your buffer. And then a scenario or a zap, that's going to be this whole group of things. So you can sort of chain a lot of these actions together. You can put filters in to make sure things only happen if something specific happens. This whole idea behind one sort of chain of events, that's going to be your zap. So it's a lot, but at least now you've heard these phrases before, so your brain sort of won't shut off because I have no idea what these things are and I can't listen anymore. Great. So you've heard of Zapier before, and there are alternatives to Zapier. I know some of you have tried other things. You might like it, you might not like it. It's all about how it feels, right? So that's why there are multiple platforms out there. So we've got our Zapier, it's the most popular one. It's sort of our window into the world. And then you have, Integromat, and you have these other things that you can try. But Zapier sort of popularized this idea of automating things. So you always have to thank them, whether you enjoy using them or not. And sometimes you just have someone else do it, and you just don't have to think about it. So we're going to go over how to create an automation. We're going to sort of get into it and figure out how to start making your lives easier. Now, as always, the first step is to prepare, and I find this the most fun part. Some people want to just sort of get in there and play around, and you can do that too. You don't have to set a Zap Live. Zapier has a free plan that you can sort of go in and play around with stuff. So you can, however you learn best is what's going to work for you. So feel free to go in and play with stuff, create an account, just do it. But when we're talking about how to actually zap our lives and create things to make it better for ourselves, that's when you're going to want to start to plan. So the first sort of subtask of this is going to be to write down all of our tools and processes. And it could be a stream of consciousness thing. Maybe you already have something that you've written down, and this preparation step is like over the course of weeks. You don't need to feel like this is something that you need to do right now, and I have to do this in the next 2 hours, and there's no urgency here, right? You're doing what you're doing, and you're going to keep doing it. So there's no sense of urgency aside from wanting to make your life easier. So, the sooner that you want that to happen, the faster you're going to move through these steps. So this is just sort of an example. I love writing things down. I really love Airtable. So I actually have an Airtable, but I know a lot of people, we just use spreadsheets. So I want to do something that most people would be familiar with. So you're going to write down both your tools and your processes. And like I said, this is over the course of however long it takes you, right? This is a constantly evolving thing. So your processes, maybe you only have 2 that you can think of off the top of your head, and that's plenty to start with. You sort of just should create this running list as you go through your week of, oh, I do this. Oh, I do this. So for instance, one of the most popular ones that I use is that second line on the process where, if I'm onboarding somebody for, a new web project or new maintenance, I'm creating a contract. I add it to my signed thing, and then I send an invoice. Then, I send in a form link. So I'm doing this process every single time I start a project. That could be a good place to start. Some of these things, sorting emails, maybe not, but maybe, you can look at, so for instance, those all-in-one platforms, that's going to be a good project management tool as well. So an all-in-one platform might be, maybe I can look up a project management platform and see some of these things that I need and see if they have automations within themselves, because they'll have a meeting scheduler, they'll have an inbox right within that. So some of this automation is also just looking for the right tool, right? So it may not be using Zapier, but it could be useful to see if your project management software also integrates with Zapier. So then you can take it a step further as well. So you have your list of tools, your list of processes, and this list of tools is actually, as we go through this, is going to, end up having a couple more columns on it as we go through. So these next 3 you can sort of do in any order. This last one, mapping out some scenarios, sometimes that might come second, and we'll go over that in a second. But so what you're going to want to do is see what the programs that you use, these Gmail, Calendly, Zoom, all of these things that we use, what do they offer themselves without connecting any other external tools. So for example, when I look up Airtable, they have a whole page about automating your work, but it looks like they're talking about using it through Zapier and other tools. So that's good to know. So maybe in another column on our tools spreadsheet, we say, integrations, and then you can put in like external tools. And then, Calendly, they integrate directly. So when somebody signs up for, to have a meeting with me, I don't then have to go into Zoom and create a Zoom meeting. It just does it for me. I just click on the button that says Zoom. So maybe in that next column, we say, oh, hey, Calendly integrates internally or externally. You can actually do it no matter what. But so you're sort of going to see what these your programs already offer. And then now we're going to see what the automation tools actually offer. So we're going to go to Zapier, Integromat, whoever, and we're going to go to their search feature. So for instance, if you go to Zapier and you go to explore, that'll drop down to explore the apps. And then that'll show you this page where you search. Integromat has a very similar thing. So we're going to basically search for what our tools offer. And so you can actually create another column in your spreadsheet that says Zapier, and then check down the box of which ones they offer. So this is all just sort of preparation. And like I said, spend 5 minutes a day going through it. Search for a couple of apps every day. So I don't want this to feel overwhelming. This is just sort of a full look and take from this what you feel is going to be useful. So once we've done sort of searching, that's when we're going to start to map out some of these scenarios that we're going to go through. So if you wanted to, after you write down your tools and processes, you can start to like take a sheet of paper, write out some circles with some lines, see what you start to create. And then you can then go back and edit it, or you can take this step now and do it. So for instance, I went and I created a mind map of some of of that second one that I mentioned, sort of creating. Every time a project is created, I do this whole thing. And then I do a couple of things based on that. So what you can do is when we're mapping out these scenarios, the reason why I put it at the end is then you can start to color code it based on what your little checkboxes are, based on whatever you do, then you can start to create stuff like this. And maybe you don't feel like it and you hate this stuff, and you can just go, like I said, you can go in and play with Zapier. It's, whatever works for you. But I find this step is really helpful because I'm visual. So I've color coded it with, I started out with just all white, right? And then I was like, okay, the beginning and the end are blacked out because that's our, so our trigger point could be something like project is confirmed, but our trigger point could actually be any of these. So for instance, I use MailerLite. So MailerLite, I can go in and assign a client a tag. And once I do that, it triggers these two things. So this is in one email where I have an onboard form link and a Calendly link, and I'm going to just send that email out to them and be like, hey, I'm excited. Here are the links. Do this stuff before we have our meeting. And then once they create their meeting, like I said, Calendly integrates directly with Zoom. And it also integrates with Zapier. So that's a decision that you sort of have to make at the beginning. I like to keep things in-house as often as possible, right? So if Calendly does it directly, I'm going to do it with Calendly first. There's just less things involved, and then there's less chance for it to go wrong. It also means there's more to manage. So it's a trade-off, but I like to have it, in-house whenever possible. So I create a contract, and then Sign Request does the sign process for me. Okay. And then I send, an invoice, and I do that through Wave. So these are all sort of free solutions, except for Calendly, I have the paid one. But so, like I said, if you're going to look at a project management software, that could take over this invoice, that could take over the contract. Maybe they have the scheduling that also integrates with Zoom. Maybe they have, a lot of them will have automatic emails that get sent out when you add them to your software. So all of this might be able to be taken over by a project management software, but, take it one step at a time. A lot of those can end up getting a little bit expensive. So, I found in this process, I eventually have to add them to my project management software. So I chose Asana because they have, again, a free sort of thing, and it's very popular. So, Asana is our project management tool. Oh, okay. Well, that actually integrates with Zapier, and my columns, that's checked off by Zapier. So maybe instead of manually, is there a way that I can take Zoom and add it to Asana? Let's find out. So this helps you sort of map it out a little bit. So you're taking, your columns, and you're sort of making a little bit more visual. So once you've done all of that, these are our steps. Once you've done these things and you started to map it out, you can start with something simple. Calendly link somebody's schedules and Zoom, and then that's taken care of. So that's just I went with a big scenario just so you can see how many opportunities there are for automation. And like I said, I'm looking at another project management tool, and that's going to take care of a lot of these things. And then so maybe Zapier is not involved in this particular one, but there might be other things that Zapier can do. And so having that list of integrations, maybe there's an extra thing I can do. Oh, Zapier has this trigger. Well, let me also do that. So it sort of opens your mind up to a couple more possibilities when you have it all laid out for you. So then we just start building our system, right? So we sign up for Zapier and Calendly and whatever else, watch some walkthrough videos. they'll have some on their own. Maybe there's somebody that you really enjoy that you follow on YouTube, and then they have a Zapier walkthrough. And then, like I said, you start small. So pick one thing that you have two apps for. Maybe it's Gmail and something else. Something really simple, really easy. Maybe you, every time you post a WordPress post, you post it to Facebook. Well, Zapier can do that. So pick one thing and just perform one task and do that one task successfully. Then try out different features. So you can add filters and things to a Zapier. So to a Zap. So if you have a WordPress post and you only want it to happen if it has a certain word in the title, because you only want to post walkthroughs, then you could filter and only post to Facebook if it's got that filter. So you can add multiple apps into a chain. So maybe, once you do one thing, it does this, and then you also want it to do this after that. So once you do that small thing, then you're going to try out those little features within that one small thing. Then my recommendation is to also create it within other things. Just because it helps visualize in different ways. People are different learners. And like we had somebody mention that they do not like Zapier at all. Okay, well, I would still say create one in Zapier, but maybe don't start with that one. Start with one of the other ones. And then once you're able to create it in that one, you can see, oh, this helped me visualize this a lot better. And then maybe you go back to Zapier and you're like, oh, this makes a lot more sense. So it just helps you sort of open your brain because they all work in different ways. Integromat's very visual and Zapier is very linear. So it's sometimes a little bit easier to visualize in different ways. And then you'll run into a situation where IFTTT has an app that no one else has. So now you've had that experience with these different apps, and Zapier is probably the largest library. So if none of the other ones, if your favorite one doesn't have it, you can probably go to Zapier and find it. And this way, at least you're a little bit familiar with it. And, you can sort of map your thinking from one app to another. So I do have a few things to sort of consider. Like I said, this is going to help you think a little bit bigger. You have your automation, you set up your automation. And like I said, maybe one tool, you don't even have to bring automation into it because that tool has already decided to add automations to it, which is great. It's perfect. Like I said, the less that you have to involve these other tools, the better. But once you have that map and you see that Zapier integrates with this other thing, you're like, oh my goodness, I could do this other thing. I totally want to do that. Oh, I can do. So it starts to, have these little branches off of, your main process, and you can start to think a little bit bigger and evolve your business and your thinking to then make your life easier without having to do extra work. But you don't want to make it more complicated. So don't just add stuff because it's fun, or add stuff because it's fun, but like don't rely on it. Like this ties into keeping an eye on everything, right? You can just set it and forget it if it's not like integral to your business, right? So connecting your WordPress posts to Facebook is obviously going to make your life easier, but it's also not catastrophic if something gets disconnected for some reason, because this is all tech, right? You kind of need to keep an eye on it. So the more that you add, the more you're going to have to keep an eye on. You also could end up adding automations that aren't quite what you needed, and then you have to adjust it. So until you're super comfortable and familiar with it, don't try to, take too many steps forward without feeling super comfortable about it, because you can end up making your life more complicated by having things that you didn't know were there, and then you forget about it. And so keep some documentation, write down where you have things, keep your life simpler, not more complicated. The point of this is to make your life better. And then, like I said, you're going to then evolve your ecosystem into more things that you didn't know were possible. So that's what's really fun about this whole process, is you get these little lights about, oh, I could do that. Oh, this thing does that. So to take a look at, WordPress specifically and how it would integrate with Zapier, this is just taken directly from their page. If you go to Zapier and you go to that integration page and you go to that search and type in WordPress, it lets you type in a second app. and it'll just map out for you what is possible. So these are some of the things that you're able to do with Zapier. Now, these are the things that I was talking about and why we went over some of those words, right? So we have triggers and actions, and then you can also do a search based on things. So these are going to sort of be your little components that you're going to want to play around with, right? So anytime somebody makes a comment, for instance, you would then create, a message in Slack to say, hey, someone commented, so that maybe you can then remember to go look at it and see if you want to reply or see if it's spam or whatever. If you update a post and you have like 6 different guest bloggers and you want to make sure that you're on top of anytime anybody updates a post, you can also post that to Slack. Maybe you have a picture that's added to Instagram. You can then add that picture to your WordPress media library. Like I said, you have the new post. So these triggers over on this left side are what you're waiting to happen. And then these actions are what's going to happen after that. So you can upload media, you can create a post, you can look at, so a post is like any kind of post. There's different kinds of post types in WordPress. So there's different things that you can do based on that trigger that they're looking for. So for instance, when you go to that Zapier page and you search for WordPress, you can connect that to anything. So you can watch for, a YouTube video being posted and then create a WordPress post based on that. So you can do it in the reverse too. WordPress can either be your main app that you watch for, or it can be the thing that you do something to after you've watched for something to happen. So that's kind of it for me. I want to make sure that you guys are, around for questions or anything like that. You can schedule a call with me and nerd out about automation, or you can come to me and say, I hate all of it. I don't get it. And we can sort of go over it for a half hour and sit there and really sort of iron out some of these things. I have a website and a baby podcast that's new. And then I have a Facebook group about maintaining your WordPress. And I find that having these automations is part of that, right? So if we go back to this one, we have all of these things that you can do to and because of WordPress. And so that's all part of maintaining this system and creating systems and all these other things. And this example right here is just what you could do with WordPress. All of your other tools, if you automate all these other things, you're going to have more time to create a WordPress post. You're going to have more time to, add information to your pages, do your SEO work. So the more time that you free up using these other tools, you can then spend more time on your WordPress, maintaining your plugins and, doing all of these other maintenance work. That's what I love to do. I love to maintain complex WordPress websites. How many, if you're in e-commerce, how many orders do you get that, you need to manage and make sure it's getting to all of the other places that you're tracking these orders and all of these things. So all of this is connected to maintaining WordPress. So that's me. Does anyone have any questions or anything?
This is amazing. I think Stella would have a lot of questions, but first, thank you very much. I think it was very insightful and something what we might not have even thought about actually could have triggered now some new ideas in our head. So maybe we can go, Shant, I will keep you for the end because we already know your answer. So I might ask Hawa, if possible, how she feels now after the presentation and if she has used Zapier or anything like Zapier before. Have you used Hawa anything?
I tried once when I was doing some work for an agency and I just got confused. But going through what Danielle, thank you so much. I mean, yes, I love going through processes and seeing how things work and mapping them out, because then that helps me make a decision as to what it is I need to do. So I can see myself going in and playing around with Zapier now that I can see a bit more about what it can do, but then also finding out with your slide earlier about some of the other areas, I didn't even know that they had integrations, which is stupid because if you look on the site, you can sort of tell. But yeah, so yeah, I'm kind of looking forward to playing around with it.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, there's a lot of, and it's, I mean, it's because it's overwhelming. You're like, I don't want, it's working fine. Why do I need to go in and make it more complex than it needs to be? Until you actually do it and you sort of feel that relief of like, oh my God, this is doing it. And I didn't have to do anything. And once you get that initial thing, but even just go through the planning stage. If you never made, don't go into this thinking, I'm going to automate. Go into it thinking, I'm going to organize. Right. So you can go through that prep stage and then it just makes it easier so that you know what's going on, you know what tools you have, and you know, so that you don't forget to do something. You can map it out for when you're going to check everything every month. I mean, automation, it's powerful, but I mean, on some level, it's not necessarily for the faint of heart. You have to go in and try it out first. Don't go into it thinking, I have to automate everything. Go into it thinking, I want to try this out and see what it does. So it doesn't have to be so like make or break. Try it and see if you'll, it's not, just play, just have fun. And like I said, if it's not something that you enjoy, do it for 5 minutes, right? You don't have to, this isn't like a life or death situation. Just go try it 5 minutes. And then you're like, I hate this. Go try a different one. It's but then once you've mapped, so the other thing about this is it makes it easier to hand off to other people, right? So if you have some automations in there and then you've already mapped out all the tools you use, it makes it easier if you have, if you're making tons of money and you have all this time, time now and whatever, but like you still don't want to do it and you don't want to manage it, you can like hire a VA, hire your cousin, hire whoever. And then, then you can say, okay, here's this document that tells you my tools. Here's where you log in to see my Zapier. And, these, now you can take a look and it makes it easier to explain to someone else what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Predrag, have you ever used any automation tools? Do you feel free to use them, or you still don't trust the machines?
I trust them, but I get lost in all of the possible apps, and I spend too much time just start to overthink, like, ooh, I can do this, and I plan like 10,000 things and I don't do anything in the end. So yeah, I just decided like I'm gonna do this one thing, and I really liked your advice, like start small, take 5 minutes and do one thing, because I spend a lot of time planning and I never automate anything because I plan too much and then I just give up.
Yeah, I mean, and that's pretty common, and it's common even just in general to do anything. I mean, I like planning. That's why I had a whole 4-step plan step. So yeah, like I said, if you go into it just sort of thinking I'm going to get organized, and that's step one, is to just make some sense out of the things, because you're just, as you go through your business and your life, you're like, oh, I need this thing, so I'm going to sign up for this thing, and then you have it. But like now you have so many things. So it's, now at least they're all in one place. Now you can start to think about what you can do. And then when you write out your processes of what you do, you can like, spreadsheets are great. So now put an order of importance on each of those lines and then sort it by order of importance. And now start with that most important, or put another column and say order of complexity, and, limit yourself to, a certain amount of columns. You don't want to over plan, but do what you need to do to make it feel comfortable to get yourself started. So if you have those 2 columns of like, here's what's most important, and here's, how complex it is, 1 through 5, then you can start to gauge, and then you just pick one and then do that one, just focus on that one thing. Like I said, some of these aren't even going to need Zapier. So you can just connect stuff and it's just right within the tool. You're not adding anything. You're not making things more complex. You're just sort of using what's already there. And then, you can sort of gauge, maybe you do those and you just cross those off your list, or you highlight them or color them or whatever. So it's sort of, you start and then you can grow. Like, it's like sort of like a megaphone, you just sort of like grow into these more complex things, but you can't get to the end. You can't just jump, right? You have to, and so you also, the planning stage is just the beginning, right? You can't make the planning this big and then have the execution be this big. So you sort of have to go and grow as you do it. So it's, and you can always set up a call with me. I would say do some of the planning stuff and then set up a call, and we'll decide where you're going to start, and that's where you start.
So what moved you, Danielle, in this direction to use Zapier? What was the trigger? I mean, in your head, when you said, I have to do this now, and this is how it has to be.
So of course, it's a bit of a journey. It's always hard to think of that one moment if it wasn't, this profound thing, right? So I really liked, like I said, the puzzles and figuring things out. And that's what sort of led me to the custom WordPress side of things, because I'm able to figure out how to get people to update their sites easy while still being a complex sort of system. And then the first thing was probably the email marketing platforms, because that's where you start to create those pathways, and you're like, okay, so you have a group of people and they have a tag. And so I created like a freebie, right? I was like, how to maintain your website or whatever I had. So your website's a house, I think I created. I made it so that you could look at what a website is based on, using a house as a metaphor. So it was like, you basically have, if someone has a tag, they go there, and then you do want to send up some follow-up emails, right? So then you have a little thing from there, and you're like, okay, then it does this, and then it does this. And so it has this whole big pathway thing. And then as you go along with, the web journey, you're like, what is this Zapier thing? How do you even say it? Is it, Zapier? Is it Zapier? How do I even, so you sort of are like, what is this thing people are talking about? And then you start to, it sort of sits in your brain, right? For like a year, 2 years, you're like, oh, all right, well, let me see if this does this. So you sort of, I didn't really have like a profound moment. It was sort of this like journey of like, well, if I did it with the email marketing and I want to do this other thing, what would happen if I did this? And is it useful? And so I sort of took a really slow journey into it. But then once I realized what I could do, and I like the visualness of Integromat. So when we're talking about Zapier, the two are kind of equated in my head, because I really like the visual, interface of Integromat, but Zapier is so powerful and so popular, and you can filter things, and it's really just unmatched in terms of crowd. So anytime a client would have something, it'd be like they would maybe potentially know about Zapier, so it'd be like, oh, we could do that with this. And so it sort of just snowballed for me. I didn't really have like this is what I need to do. It was more like, once you get there and you're sort of like, it's a no-brainer. If I can post stuff and look at stuff and do things without having to think about it, I just have a thing in my calendar to check because all of these, so Zapier, they have a list. Once you've created it and it's run, they have like a sort of like a report of how many times it's run and what it did. So that's a good way to check and make sure things are running. In terms of maintenance, like I said, you're going to want to make sure these things are running. So if you got 3 orders and it's supposed to do this thing when you get those orders, you can see that it did those 3 things. So you just have a thing in your calendar to go check and make sure it's still running and doing its thing. And then you just don't have to think about it. And you're like, oh my God, why wasn't I doing this before? So it's sort of like at some point it has this like click, right? And then you're like, oh. So for me, it was a snowball effect in terms of automation. It was like, I like what I'm doing and this is great. And then you're like, now I love what I'm doing. There's so many things I could do here. And it's my puzzle brain was like, I could fit. It's like a puzzle that doesn't have an end picture. You're just constantly making it. And it's like, I don't know, it's like iridescent puzzle or something, where every time you sort of move it to the light, it changes a little bit, and it's just fun for me.
Thank you. I really appreciate. It seems that it's that Zapier or automation tools don't really have a time, but it's a matter of our digestion and understanding. So now I'm gonna put the drums, da da da. Shanta, if you have a time, tell us first why you decided. I mean, slowly. My question is still on. So why you decided to commit your time to automation, and how, and what was your journey? Let's learn something from you.
So my background, my degree that I did at Ryerson University here in Ontario is information technology management. So we learned project management. We learned about processes. That was drilled into our head right from day one. So usually what I do is in my own business, I usually put myself forward as the automation person versus say the design person. So our job is to make sure that the back end works. You know, when, for example, in our own system that we host on AWS, when we spin up a development site, it automatically creates an S3 bucket that we can use for backups. We then set up the site so that it automatically installs Updraft, that it installs WordFence, right? And that we're working still on now getting Updraft to then connect automatically to that S3. Right now, it's a manual sort of function. So we spin up a development site. Here's the URL. Boom, go, and then it creates one in our WordPress system that we've developed, and it'll create the S3 bucket. We just have to take and copy that over into the Updraft Plus plugin, and then it makes the connection. So then we set up the Updraft Plus to do the updates as we see fit. We don't do that automatically, only because it depends on the client right now. But then we set up a regular schedule, usually twice a week or something similar, and that just automatically then sends it to S3. So backups and security are probably one of the biggest ones that are overlooked, and that you wouldn't necessarily need something like Zapier for. Interestingly enough, I spent most of my morning, I've been doing a lot of cleanup, and I'm implementing some new systems personally with journals and such. So the big one that I actually spent the morning doing is actually on GoDaddy Pro. So it was funny that you messaged me, and I was literally in my GoDaddy Pro dashboard that I probably haven't touched in weeks, admittedly, but making sure that all the ones that are in our system, because we don't host them on GoDaddy, are in there so that I can literally go through and go, okay, this belongs to this client. And I know that they have a bunch of systems in there. No, I'm not plugging them per se, but because I'm currently using the free version of it. But the idea is that is my dashboard, where I can go and say, update all of these. The backups are a separate system. So, but, going back to the whole Zapier idea, when I started my journey a few months ago, and like you said earlier, how do you pronounce your name? Is it Pradag?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just like you, I spent a lot of time going through and, figuring out these very complex systems. And the reason I did that is because I had trouble figuring out which systems I needed. I'm the type of person who needs a template to follow, and I'm not going to invest a lot of time in something if I know that it can't do that one thing that I need it to do from beginning to end. So yes, Danielle, you're quite right where you have to say start small, but at the same time, I think if I do this small and this small and this small, that's the one thing I don't like about Zapier, is the fact that it is just this, and it can get out of control. However, if I can take all of those little pieces and put them into a single flow and say, this is my email flow, or this is whatever that flow is. And yeah, if something goes wrong, I need to be notified. Right. And so to me, you were talking about different apps and things like that. The less touches is the term I use. The less touches I have to make, the better. Zapier means that I have to make one more touch. So I spend a lot of time going through things like Power Automate in Microsoft because I have an Office subscription. So, you know, I don't use Google for almost anything. I know that sounds really strange, but the reality is that I don't want to use things like even the simplest thing. I do not want to use my email in a web browser. That to me, and I literally just took off my Google email from my Outlook because it's screwing up like badly, and it's very distracting. So I'm sort of, you know, minimizing my life. So for me, I'm going to take another look at something like Power Automate and say, well, it's already tied into my email. So why can't I do these things, right? Or add it. I don't want to necessarily do it to a spreadsheet per se, but I'm a whiz when it comes to spreadsheets. But I also use Airtable, and I'm investigating sort of the ties between Microsoft and that, and WordPress and Airtable. I'm loving Airtable. I'm actually building a chatbot with it. So an RPG chatbot, which is just absolutely amazing. I'm having so much fun with it. So to me, that's another automation that a lot of people overlook is chatbots, which I'm digging into and I'm offering to my clients.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there. I mean, so basically, I mean, so just the last thing you said, for instance, you know, you can create a WordPress post from an Airtable record, right? And so at first, my first reaction was, why? Why would you even bother doing that? You can just go into WordPress and do it. But if you're spending all of your day in Airtable, of course you're going to do that, because then that's one less place that you have to go to do things. Less touches is exactly right. So this is sort of like this flow that I took you through is a little bit more of like a getting to know it, and it's sort of like a bell curve, right? So you're sort of at sort of the tail end of that curve where you're like, you know, creating Zaps and learning it and creating a bunch of little ones. And then up here, you're kind of like starting to maybe chain them together, because Zapier and Integromat. So that's kind of why I do like Integromat. I know this is all about, you know, Zap your life, but Integromat I like because it's easier to visualize sort of chaining things together and doing those steps. But Zapier does the same thing. Their pricing structure is just different. So if you have a bunch of multi-tiered things that are going to be run through a whole bunch of times, Integromat is going to get a lot more expensive. But if you have, you know, a couple that you only need like 2 really long ones, then maybe Zapier is going to be more expensive. So that's what's really great about what Zapier has sort of initiated in the community, is that it sort of then prompted all these other things to do things in different ways. And you have automation plugins right within WordPress to minimize some of that. So you can automate stuff without having to take on a Zapier or anything like that. But like you had mentioned about, you know, what you do the most, I mean, that's sort of what the whole concept of maintenance platform, so like managed hosting, is just a bunch of automations related to WordPress for people who don't want to do it manually or can't. So I mean, you know, the whole thing that I would use the most often is staging. So I mean, Flywheel has local, that you basically just develop a site locally and push it and it's live, and you're like, oh my god, this is incredible. So it's sort of like automation is this whole big world. That's why I went over like, here's the things that you can do. Like it's literally endless. But yeah, so it's I look at it more as a bell curve. Like I said, I'm looking into a project management software. At first I'm like, why would you have one tool to do everything? You could just have like this one, and so you sort of like are piecing these things together. And I love the way Calendly does this. But then like, so now I'm in my journey of tools, I'm sort of at the, you know, the downward spiral of that, you know, integrating the tools into one, because I'm a little bit bigger now and I can see a little bit of the bigger picture, and the automations are built in, so there's less touches. So everything you're saying is absolutely correct.
Well, and that's the thing, like I'm using Calendly right now, and yes, it ties into Zoom. So I know that, and into my own calendar. So somebody books an appointment there, it then creates a Zoom, and then it goes into my Outlook calendar. Here's the thing. I pay for Zoom. I pay for Calendly, or sorry, I don't pay for it yet, but I'm going to probably do that. But here's the thing. There is actually a system within Microsoft called Booking. Why would I need something like Calendly if it does it already? And I'm already paying for it as part of this package.
Yeah.
The other part is, I can set up a form that I can put onto my website that then says all of these things. So you know, I might still use things like Gravity Forms, which I have a pro account for, but you know, can I just have the Gravity Forms go to whatever I need in WordPress or vice versa, and Outlook and so on. But you know, like so there's booking there, and then I can use Teams instead of Zoom, which I'm paying for every month. So for me, it's not only just about how it all integrates together. Because one, it gives me less touches, and number two, I'm paying less money for it. Right. Otherwise, I'm paying for things duplicating that cost. So I literally spent weeks going through it, and I'm at the point where I may actually have to give in and probably go back to trying Zapier. I did sign up at one point, but literally the trial just ran out. So because I didn't get into it, but I may have to go back and try it one more time, because you know, there comes a point, and I'm sure you understand this, there comes a point where you go, I'm spending way too much time fighting with this. My time is worth more than fighting with the tool.
Yeah. And I mean, that's kind of why I love the preparation step, right? So all the stuff you're talking about is all part of that prep step. And then at the end, you know, and then you're also at the last point that I made of evolve your ecosystem, right? So once you have something set up, it makes it a lot easier to edit like one or two or three things and like look at how you can integrate those together, or is there a tool or a platform that'll do these, rather than looking at everything all at once. So once you have things set up, and maybe it's just a matter of being like, I'll just use Calendly for now, and that's fine, you know, like you just sort of do what you need done, but it helps you take that next step and plan ahead a little bit. So you're sort of always doing the preparation step, right? You're just always preparing and planning and
continual improvement, right?
Exactly.
Continual improvement. Yeah.
And that's also why I like Integromat. So even if you end up using Zapier in the end, which it could be, Integromat lets you map things out, because you can sort of, you don't have to make it live, like I said, but it lets you map it out visually to as many steps as you want. Okay. So you can see and you know, it's just, I like it visual, but you know, a lot of people are going to use Zapier because it's more popular. And you know, if, like I said, if they're going to be using it a lot and having it run through a lot of steps, Zapier is going to make a lot more sense, you know, financially. But if you're just playing, I mean, play with all of them, you know, find what's fun for you.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love it.
Oh, sorry. I think we just converted Shanta from not not using Zapier to perhaps maybe in the end I will try something. So I think we did a good job. It's not only that we persuaded people to use who never tried it, but we also the ones who were thinking not to use it again might give it a try. So Daniela, I think you did a very good job.
Excellent.
Do we have more questions for how about you?
I'm actually curious to know what project management software Danielle's been looking at.
I'm looking at Plutio. I'm very particular about this sort of ethereal feeling that I can't like. So I've used Asana, right? I just don't feel, it doesn't feel right. And I'm not interested in trying to articulate what it is, because I just don't, you know, maybe as I gather more data and I start to actually use one of them long term. I have a couple of clients that'll use Asana, and so I'll use it for them. And then I have one that uses Active Collab, which is also kind of, I was able to pull some stuff out of there that I liked. So when I just started working with a VA, and I listed out all of my tools and I put, you know, what I use each of them for, that's sort of where I took those screenshots from. And I was like, here's what I want to do. She was able to then sort of go look at these project manager things. I know there's like ClickUp that'll do stuff, but I kind of needed a little bit of client management and a little bit of project management. And then I also use like Wave, but so if that can sort of integrate from an invoicing standpoint. So Plutio seems like it'll cover a lot of that, and they're on the newer side. So as they implement things, I can suggest things, and they have automations that's upcoming, but they also will do some canned email that are, the same email that you send to every client after this one thing happens. So that's what I'm looking at now. I'm looking to implement it over the next couple of weeks and see how it works out for me. But obviously, since I do tools and all this stuff, I'm kind of probably changing at least double the rate my tools that most people do, just because I'm like, it's not quite shiny object syndrome, but it's like, it's whatever the next step of that down is. I'm not always looking at the new thing, but like if this thing comes out and I'm like, oh my God, that does this thing, I need to be able to at least try that. So we'll see. Plutio will hopefully be around for at least a couple of years and I'll just stick with it. But that's what I'm looking at right now.
Okay.
Maybe how you have some proposal. Maybe you have
No, I'm actually just interested because obviously I've got quite a background in corporate, so I'm used to like Microsoft Project and things like that. And but I just don't. I just find MS Project is too much.
even with the package I have, because I'll tell you something. We used it as part of our project management course. Yeah, I got an A- in that freaking thing. Just in Microsoft Project, it was beautiful. I have to admit, and it's so bloody expensive. I can't use it.
Yeah, so that's my thing. It's because of the cost, and I'm like trying to explore different tools.
Well, and that's what's really nice about having all of these different tools to start out is you figure out what's really important to you. So I had like Tick was actually a really great to-do app that I was using, and I was able to plan stuff and plan subtasks, and then having all of these random tools actually really helped me to come up with what I needed in an all-in-one platform. So that's the other thing that's nice about having things separate.
So the one thing I know, a friend of mine said, she loves Gantt Charts, which I do too, right? It turns out Airtable is going to be offering it.
Yeah.
So I'm
sort of have a board,
like leaning towards trying Airtable as my project management and CRM, because I can build it however I want.
Yeah.
And the automations that are available are incredible. So the only other one that I've been using is, which I haven't been doing as much of, but I used it in my last position. And to me, Danielle, you're absolutely right. When you're talking about things like Asana and Trello, they don't have the structure that I need.
Yeah.
Right. Like if I move this from here to here, it has like Jira and Confluence, which is what I've been using, not so much as a project management, but like ticketing system and so on. It has those automations in it. When I transfer this to this, it automatically does this. So maybe that's a lot of the key to what I'm looking at. And it has that without having to use something like Zapier or whatever to do those things. It's already built in.
Yeah. Well, that's what's nice about Zapier is it doesn't, like I said, that's why I had that in the beginning of like, there's other things you can automate besides just project management and your website. So there's just, if you just pick something and try it, the one thing in many platforms, then you can see what each platform is good at. Because that's what I did with like Airtable. I keep so much in Airtable, but I just, for me, don't think it's where it needs to be able to be my project management platform. I love Airtable. I'm an advocate of Airtable, but like, it's just not where I need it to be for project management. And maybe in a few years it will be, maybe, I mean, it's kind of like Trello. I have a client who just pimped out Trello. I mean, it is this Trello monster of a project management software, but then it starts to get slow, or it starts to, so it's like, it's almost like we as like a community or me as a person, we love a tool and then we try to stretch it a little bit and we see where its limits are. And so for me, I hit those limits of what a tool can do, I think, before some other people do. So like Trello is really attractive for, any kind of moving cards from one board to another and organizing things. And so it's great. And then, so we try to like make it fit. And then, so I feel that limit, I think, a little bit sooner than most people do. And that's why I switch, because I'd rather not work to get something to do what I need it to do when there's so many options out there.
Wow. Can we choose? In the sea of options, are we able to choose? All right. So Do we have more question for each other at this meetup? No, so we're good. We need maybe for you, Danielle, you're probably gonna head up with a coffee, and I'm sure we're in European time. We're gonna put pajamas right now on. So, so save the day for us while we are sleeping. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. It was lovely talk to hear. We've learned a lot, and I'm sure if you have any news, come and join us again. Thank you
Yeah.
very much, everyone.
Thanks for having me.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.